it's really beautiful when you realize how rich life can be when you learn to take away responding with fear, responding to life or reacting to life because you're afraid or want to survive or want to appear like you know what you're doing. Or when you start to dissolve the ego, what's left is wisdom, and wisdom is connectivity, really.
How did you end up here, firstly? 42 acres, so we are where we're at right now.
Gosh, how far back to go, right?
Yeah. Birth.
So, I mean, it feels like in some ways for a long time I felt like, what am I doing here? How have I popped up here? Because, I was born on a council estate in London because my parents had to flee war in Nicaragua. So I'm mixed race. My mother's English and my dad's Nicaraguan, and they were living there.
Is that what the dual name comes from?
Yeah, Stevens-Vallecillo.
Yeah.
My mum and my father.
Mm-hmm.
And it was during the 80s, the Sandinista revolution, the socialist revolution in Nicaragua. And my parents were doing work to support the socialist movement. And they wanted to have children. So they'd lived out one civil war. And they'd been very much part of the movement around education as a way of having political understanding and political power. So they did education for the masses, and my dad went out to the mountains and taught people to read and write, and that was kind of part of the movement. And there was a lot of international support for this movement. Latin Americans are incredibly socially and politically active and aware. So it's very interesting being a mixed race person and seeing the duality and the difference really in culture. And they wanted to have children, so after the first civil war they decided to leave because there was another one coming. And subsequently I was born in a council estate. We were really penniless, and but my parents were both very intellectual, and growing up I immediately felt like, what is my soul doing here? Like, why am I in the city? I genuinely couldn't understand the city at all, even though that's all I ever knew. And I found myself finding a lot of comfort in the hedgerows of the city. And I also lived near the Thames, and I found a lot of comfort in just sitting by the itinerant boatie community. I used to just get something from that, watching how those people were relating to the world. And I also used to do a lot of walking in the city very young, a lot of kind of walking and in any green area that I could possibly find. And eventually, when I was 18, I decided to travel around the world on my own, and spent a lot of time with indigenous communities when I was 18, and also spent time in Latin America in the Amazon, and I spent 4 months in Nicaragua, where I'm from. And I think actually now when I look back, my soul my soul expresses a lot of indigenous knowing that I didn't consciously know about. So I used to walk in Asia, I just walked and walked for several days, and then walked into a tribe and was like, can I stay here? And there was like a lack of fear of community and a lack of fear of the natural world. I crossed rivers with my backpack on my head. I just didn't, from a very young age, I just didn't have that fear. I actually felt more afraid of modern society, and more afraid of pharmaceuticals, and more afraid of the rat race. I was deeply distrusting of all of that from a very, just innately.
Powerful. Have that fearlessness.
Yeah, I remember my parents saying to me, you want to travel for a year. Do you realise that you're a young woman on your own wanting to backpack for a year? You might, something awful might happen to you. And I remember saying to them, I would rather die living than live dying.
And how old were you?
18. Yeah, I mean, you could call it reckless. Now I look back on it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I walked around Africa, in South Africa. I hitchhiked around South Africa from a very, I was 19 by that time because I'd been traveling for so long. And went and spent time with the Xhosa tribe, the Zulus. I went to Lesotho and spent time there. And I just had the most incredible experiences time and time again of people who have materially, and I say in inverted commas, so little, but actually had so much.
What were you really benefiting from spending time with them? What was the main things that you were?
I mean, it's hard to say what, to distill that. And one of the things that I've now started to be able to understand within myself is I'm deeply relational. So it's the wholeness actually. It's when we go to work, we separate parts of ourselves from other parts. It was this kind of you are experiencing yourself as nature. And so when I would walk into someone's home and they would have the medicines, I remember having conjunctivitis in the Amazon, and I was staying with a Quechua woman, and I went blind. I couldn't see. And she literally grabbed me and shoved me in a room with a pot and was like, pee, and put it on your eyes. And I'm like, really? She's like, yeah, and put it on your eyes. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm blind right now, so I'm feeling pretty vulnerable, so I'm open to trying anything. So I did it, and within 2 days, it was gone. I could feel it working when I put it on my eyes. I had this kind of slight, kind of nice burning sensation, and I could feel it kind of clearing out the infection. As part of that trip, we also gathered medicinal plants and fed her son medicinal plants, and he passed a tapeworm. And we also foraged clay and made pottery. So our entire existence was just working with the natural world. They offered me to go into the Amazon and dig salt, but they said there was anaconda, and I freaked out, couldn't go, because I was like, I don't think I can do a face down with an anaconda.
Yeah, so you had a good balance of fear.
Yeah, I wasn't like completely reckless, but yeah, so that was for me, that was the beginning of what you would call like my genuine university, or and that trip began to wake up or help me understand what my discomfort was, because you can imagine growing up living with a level of discomfort about being in a foreign place but not being foreign.
Yeah, I'd say it's awareness. It's like a deep awareness of something's not quite feeling connected, maybe.
Yeah, and interestingly, my parents wouldn't have left Nicaragua if there wasn't war. So maybe somehow, I was more of Nicaragua than I was of modern society in some way, but I have no very set belief system. But there was definitely something askew, and I don't know whether there's lots of people being born in that kind of, because modern society isn't deeply natural, right? So actually it might just be a level of soul calling that a lot of people ignore. But because I had roots only one generation back on the land, I was able to access it more quickly than maybe some.
Why do you think your mum and dad didn't have that urge to seek different parts of the world, like, or return, or like look for?
Yeah, well, my mum's from London, and so I think they were being really pragmatic. Nicaragua was the second poorest country in the world when I was growing up, so you can imagine that even though they would have been middle class in Nicaragua, they were penniless in England, and they needed the support of my grandparents to help raise us so that they could both work. My dad was very young, so my mum helped him go to university and study and things. So I think it was more of a survival And I think that was also partly what I was rejecting in a way, was I don't want to survive, I want to live. And that's really what I explored.
And when you returned, how did you integrate those travels or those things you accessed when you were there? Because when I experienced parts of the world that were living a little bit more, I'd say, connected, and they had, not access to what we'd call, money really, or anything like material. They had access to land and their movement and food in a way that just felt more, connected and nourishing. But coming back, it was almost like it was I just couldn't seem to integrate that part of me.
Yeah.
That I accessed when I was there, and it was actually I felt even more isolated when I came back, and it was almost like I had to kind of let that part go in order to live here, or it was just too overwhelming.
Yeah, it was overwhelming. I had a few things that were really positive. So I'd got a place in university to study craft, and I went to university in Falmouth, which is a really wild landscape. And I spent those years in many ways integrating what I'd learnt and expressing that through the work I was doing in the course. So I got really interested in colony collapse. I was fascinated by seed pods. I did work to do with scarcity of water, because I'd witnessed scarcity of water. And so I did social and community work around water. And so I luckily for me, doing an arty subject meant that I was able to go inside quite internally and kind of explore that inner landscape. But ultimately, by the time I'd done my 3 years, I felt like I was going further away from what I was about, not closer towards. So I then applied for Erasmus funding and got funding to go back to the Amazon at the end of the 3 years to do to spend more time with Indigenous communities, which is what I did.
What's Erasmus funding?
It's like a international exchange funding for students specifically to go and study from another culture, and then kind of bring things back and do a project around it. So I did that. I spent more time in the Amazon and published a book called The Last Survivors or The First to Succeed, which was printed with vegetable inks and hand bound. We did the binding ourselves, and that was basically my diaries from that time. And we spent time with all different communities from different stages of development. And forgive me if you're Indigenous, because I really don't like the word developed and underdeveloped or less developed then, because I just I'm not a subscriber to that philosophy. And that's why I called the book The Last Survivors or The First to Succeed. Because actually Indigenous people are the only people that live sustainably on this planet. So surely, we're not succeeding as a Western modern race.
Even the concept of Indigenous, right? We're all Indigenous to some place. Even that concept and the term's used a lot.
Yes.
And people know what you mean when you refer to, people that are indigenous or native to the land. But it's a contradicting one, because we're all somewhat indigenous, right?
Yes.
To some place.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I think when I use it, I would use it to describe people who are born in a place where their lives are really deeply connected with their landscape. And I think that part of the work of our time is, and part of the huge piece of work that's coming up for lots of people now, is to do with how do I live in better connection with nature myself as part of nature. And I feel like our whole, so many parts of our Western society are really looking for more meaning, and that includes cosmological worldviews and spirituality. And how do I honour myself as part of nature? How do I honour nature in right relation to what I'm doing? And that's a kind of what I'd say for me is an emerging movement. And that's beautiful because it ties together the inner world and the outer landscape, whether that's, farming some of your own food, and there's this, big resurgence towards getting back to the land. I think in years to come, there'll be more and more people wanting to live on land and claiming their right to be on land as people of land and of nature. And then there's the tradition of indigenousness and that being passed down and being born from many generations of people that have not been displaced yet. And so when I use that term, I'm kind of speaking about that kind of lineage. But I agree, we're all of nature, we're all of a certain place.
I just love observing how words, even the word tradition, I was looking, like the definition of that is to pass it down through generation. It's not just something you do every year. It's like it's imbuing it into the next generation.
Yeah.
And it's powerful because sometimes we don't think in terms of that, because the world changes so quickly. It's like, what things are we going to keep sacred, and make sure we honour to then pass it down in the right way.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, of course, are. I mean, generally in the space and the conversations I'm having, it's all about going back to that real, like, what is fulfilling, and it's very simple, and it doesn't go away, like having a bigger connection to the food and the place you live, because we've gone off in this direction, and we just know that narrative has been somewhat sold to us, and it doesn't work. It's actually a bit of a trap to feel that externally you're going to get some sort of reward from compromising your time and your energy to something that largely is about consuming.
So I'm conscious that I didn't answer your question when you
how'd you get here? That's okay. We've gone down a different route and I'm happy with it. But okay. I mean, it's a big question, because how'd you get here? It's almost like, where did the journey begin for you to start like asking those questions and following the threads that I know you have a strong connection with and pull in certain directions?
Yeah.
And what I get from you actually is that you don't rush with certain things, and I see a patience, which I respect, and you have a groundedness that's like, okay, let's just not jump too far to assume or to judge what this might be. And you can talk about this, of how you kind of negotiate things that don't feel right for you.
This is true, yeah. I am very patient. I was picking rose hips today. I mean, I don't see myself as patient. I'm saying it because people keep telling me that I'm really patient. And I think...
I guess it's all in context, right?
It's in context.
Context, because you might get your patience from the natural world, and that inspires you to potentially, follow that guidance. But in context of us as modern day humans,
it's true.
It's like, you stand out.
It's true. Yeah. I was picking rose hips to make a batch of rose hip ketchup for Medicine Fest, and I was like saying to the rose hips, like, thank you so much, like I planted you in the middle of lockdown, and now look, like there's so many rose hips and there's so much medicine here, so much vitamin C, and that project's only just starting to give fruits like three years later. And I was really reflecting on the holding that I do. As I was doing it, I was kind of holding myself a little bit and going, I know that the land is speaking to me, and I know that my work is to just reassure everyone that the land wants to provide, but at her pace, at her choice, at their choice, and I'm just here responding to that. That's all I'm doing. I'm not leading it. I'm just being guided over time, and the land is giving, and I'm able to see and receive, and then I do my work, and then she gives more. And actually how that translates to numbers on spreadsheets is really, it's not an easy task for me, but it does translate to numbers on spreadsheets over time. And I try and hold, the knowledge and the conversation with the land as the most important piece of my work. And then I try and trust that the numbers and the spreadsheets will work, because I know that land gives more than you expect when you're in right relation, right? But the timeline is the land's timeline. It's not our timeline.
Why is it important to communicate with the land?
It's an interesting question, because what my brain wants to frame that differently. The land is speaking, so why is it important to listen?
It's a great question. Do you want to answer it?
Why? Well, why wouldn't you want to be in conversation with everything? It's easier, actually. When you're guided, then life's easier, because you're not responding from... It's really beautiful when you realise how rich life can be when you learn to take away responding with fear, responding to life or reacting to life because you're afraid or want to survive or want to appear like you know what you're doing. Or when you start to dissolve the ego, what's left is wisdom, and wisdom is connectivity, really. It's like, okay, my life is greater than just my life. I'm part of something much more important. I'm part of a community. I'm part of a society. I'm part of a cosmology. I'm part of a history. And actually, what is now asking of me? What is my piece in all of this? And actually, it's a deeply restful place to be. It's much more peaceful.
Yeah, beautiful. Well said. What gets in the way of that? Do you think for you?
I was going to say myself.
Yeah, let's start with you. What gets in the way of that for you?
No, myself.
Okay.
For me, as something that I know that I battle with is this feeling that I've chosen to do something that is with nature, that was, I make, I'm food as medicine. I help to hold the land and food here, but I don't do it in a way that is a conventional farming land manager. So even, on a daily basis, I get asked, what's the plan? I get asked, where are the results or the figures? And also, what's the final answer? And I'm like, I'm just feeling in all the time. And I really increasingly want to learn to help people to feel in and to trust themselves, their intuitions, But I'm also a woman on land. And it's really important to name that very few women actually, are farmers, or whatever you want to call me, wild tenders, in this country. So I often will be sat in a predominantly male space. And I'm not, I'm white passing, I'm mixed race. So I'm not in, whilst I have an indigenous soul, it's not actually of England as such. Or I feel like that's the re-getting to know of this landscape and the history of this place. As you said, it's passed down through many generations, and I feel like my piece is to do some of the healing work of what separation has caused, and to pass it down and through, but also to hold space for others that want to do that for themselves. Because essentially, foraging, it's like waking up a DNA that's inside of all of us. It's not like I'm particularly magical for holding that knowledge. It's actually there. if you sit with a plant and take some time, there's a whole load of information that plant's given you. There was a man, clearly a white man, who coined the concept that plants tell you what they're good for. But there are a million indigenous, non-white women that knew that before him, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to name that I'm in a minority on several levels. And I think lack of confidence has gotten in the way.
Mm-hmm.
Lack of confidence of being in the space, if I'm honest. And I try and hold myself with love over that. And I also try and notice when the pain of that wants to turn to anger or defensiveness, right? To defend my way of being or defend who I am, or and for me, and I have a lot of respect for activists, a lot, but for me personally, I really need to sit in. I love what I do. I love my life. I love who I am. I love you, and let's just cultivate loads of joy around this
Mm-hmm.
healing work. And so working on my own sense of insecurity, I guess, is what gets in my way sometimes, or has done in the past.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. It needs to be attractive also. Whatever you're passionate about and standing for, it needs to be attractive to others. Because if I was to see you not having a good time and being very defensive and not open and not willing to sit here and just have a conversation, I'd be like, okay, well, we're trying to detach me from actually what it is you want to promote and help just pass around. And it's it needs to, so it's like the artist's responsibility. There's a quote that says the artist's responsibility is to make the revolution irresistible. So it's we're attracted to those things that people really just, they live, and it's whatever we care about, we have to make it attractive to, and by that, just singing the song from a place of love, and that's going to attract others, and it's going to allow us all to just feel safe around the topic and the subject. So it's more engaging, really.
Yeah, and I feel like it's interesting for me. I did some work around race with an amazing Buddhist teacher called Lama Rod, and I'm going to paraphrase this, and I hope I do it respectfully enough. But he held a group for people who felt they were white and a people who felt that they weren't white, and I didn't know which group to go to, and I found myself caught in a bit of a kind of not sure who I belonged to, not particularly being welcomed by either group, and for myself, I know that when I feel pain over not belonging, when I feel pain over being separate from land, that it can cause reactivity that creates more pain. And so for me, the work of being on the land is amazing. It's incredible work, but it's not the only work. The work of healing my wounding of separation, of difference, of being a woman in a predominantly male space, that's also really important work, because that's what allows me to be in a loving space on land, which helps me to, because it's not just me that's suffering, right? Even though minority groups suffer, actually those whose ancestors have created that separation also suffer from that from the separation and the disconnection. So we're all actually suffering from the pain that's been caused in the past. And it's a collective healing that needs to happen in order to come back into connection on every side and every angle.
Yeah, I think the separation and the identifying as separate, it has its place and it's needed in certain aspects, but ultimately, if it's separate and it's separating, then you're kind of perpetuating that same idea that you're really trying not to.
There's a beautiful saying around that so when I was on this trip to the Amazon, I was welcomed into an Inga community in Colombia, and there was a saying that they had written on the wall in one of their community centres that stayed with me forever, and it's really come up actually around this separation, unity, and it was something like, they who recognise diversity, they who recognise their own individuality can celebrate diversity and therefore unity for all. And I think that's really beautiful, because when we look at nature, nature's not single. Nature's many, and an area that has not been heavily ploughed or heavily chemicalised has an incredible biodiversity, right? So it's beautiful to recognise that a kind of a whole ecosystem is a diverse ecosystem, and therefore there is difference in that system, and we can be joyful about that. And essentially, that's what can create unity. Is we go, hey, I'm Tasha. I have all these different things going on. You're Chris, and you have all these different things going on, and that's how we can come together. Is through that recognition and celebration. We don't need to be the same.
Yeah, there is only difference, really, like in every human. It's amazing how just having a conversation with someone who's, I've had 100 conversations on this podcast, and everyone has a unique flavour of what it is they bring. And so sometimes I don't honour that enough in people, how unique really someone is, and their own take and their own flavour. But yeah, if we get on side about it, on team, we're really like detached from the diversity of everyone. But it's a powerful point. It's really important. And what you touched on before, I think it's inspiring to hear like you doing, I guess, what I'd call the inner work around things, because the inner work is a big piece, because we've all been brought up in this modern world, which is it carries a lot of unmet needs as children, and like even our values get meshed up in the cultural narratives of corporation and stuff, and the workplace, and it's just a bit of a, like, the world has changed 50 years. It's just completely changed, and there's so much going on, even the disconnection from our emotions, learning things at school, and just the lack of emphasis on how to be a functioning, healthy human. Like that complete disconnection. If I am not doing the inner work in whatever aspect of my life, then I'm not fully there, because it's always important just to introspect of like, oh, how have I been conditioned over time? Because our conditioning is it's a bit mad. It feeds into how we see the world, and if we're not doing that inner work to really introspect, to really check ourselves and what angle we're coming through. But it's inspiring to hear you touch upon that, because we can talk about the land and what's in this and that, but for me, like this podcast, it's all about like how we're viewing ourselves in what we're communicating to others about.
When you were saying about at school we don't get taught how to be a happy, healthy, whole human, I couldn't agree with you more. And 'cause my daughter's at school, she's 11, and I almost find myself slightly saying to her, school's not everything, and actually your happiness is so important. So if you're exhausted tonight and you can't do your homework, I fully support you not to hand it in. And I think a lot of people in and out of the school system would agree that the school system has been put in place to regurgitate information, and we're not really in a time anymore where that is, I would say, the most needed thing in from a school. I would say that support around personal development, happiness, health, mental health, community relationships are more important, and that more emphasis will need to be put on those, particularly in the given current literal climate. And I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean that literally, that we have challenges on our back door happening now that we need to show up to. And as a race of people, we need to build community and support around that. And we have so many young people experiencing so many mental health issues. It's really frightening. And how we build up a narrative around what it means to show up to our current challenges as a race, but also as a global community, is personally more of a priority from where I'm standing than teaching a child algebra. And I find it interesting because I would almost switch it round. I'd say, okay, the kind of the personal development and the relational and the emotional and the mental and the physical are more important. And, you know, how to grow your own food and how to mend things. And then actually all the kind of academic pieces could come a little bit later when pupils can choose what it is that they want to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because no matter how great you are at maths, if you're so depressed you're suicidal, that's not a strong position to be in.
No.
So, you know, which one's more important?
Yeah, I think it's agreeing on what is important first and foremost.
Mm.
If it's to have a strong sense of yourself, to be content and at peace with, you know, and have a loving family and a good social network, like that's really a priority for any human that wants to be healthy and wants to thrive. So it's like agreeing on those things first, and then what do we need to encourage and, like have those things as a youngster. I think knowing yourself and just what I break down is like happy, healthy human is someone who just knows themselves and is not trying to compromise on what health means to them for their peers, or like trying to compromise on things that are important to them through trying to get external gratification,
or reward, I guess.
and praise and all sorts. But I think the world's going to change rapidly.
It is changing. That's what's nice about having conversations like this.
Yeah,
is that
we can look back on this.
You know, I thought that it would take a lot longer, if I'm honest. Definitely, you know, someone was asking me what my job was at a party or something, and I was saying, well, I grow mushrooms, I keep bees, I forage, I make medicines, I make food. I plant lots of more medicines, and they were like, "Whoa, you have such a cool job."
Mm-hmm.
They were like, "That's so hipster," they said. And I just ended up going, "Oh, I was well into this before it was cool." And then I listened to myself. I was like, "Just shut up, Tasha. Just stop talking. just take it." It's like, yeah, I'm really cool.
You almost, it's like part of you's just making sure that they know you've been invested in this.
I'm in it for the long run.
I'm not cool, by the way. I was doing this way. Yeah, it's interesting. So where does what is that? I forgot the name. Tinkle Bubble.
Tinker's Bubble.
Tinker's Bubble. Where does Tinker's Bubble fit in?
So, as I said, I went to uni. I did the uni thing. But then afterwards, I was like, I'm not done. I'm not done on my journey. And so I got invited after I came back from the Amazon and did some work. I was sort of angling at a lot of my work being in the kind of container of artist. So I had an exhibition as part of that trip, and then during that exhibition, I was invited to be part of a boatie community in Falmouth, which was amazing. Ponchard and Boatyard. And it was my first real playtime of living in a group of people all living in old wooden boats on the sea, and just living more communally, sharing a shower, living very simply. My rent was £25 a week, and I'd learnt, you know, I'd done things like dig peanuts and forage snails for the dinner, and, you know, in the Amazon, and grown corn and made pottery. And I I wanted that. I just wanted that. So when I managed to lower my living costs, I was free to learn and dedicate myself to foraging. And I started growing vegetables and on the boat deck, and fishing. I used to do a lot of fishing and crabbing. And before I knew it, something like 50-60% of my food was coming from the landscape. And I met the man who was going to be the father of my daughter, who was really crazy about foraging and taught me a lot of what I know. He did, during the time that we were dating, have a cardiac arrest from eating the most poisonous plant in the UK called hemlock. So we were meant to go on a date, meant to go camping, and he just didn't turn up one day. And he'd had, I think, 2 cardiac arrests.
Oh, wow.
So I laugh now, but I do owe my daughter's life to modern medicine.
I'm only laughing because you're laughing.
I'm laughing because she's about to be dropped off by him,
okay.
and I'm telling our story. We went on separate ways some years ago.
Yeah.
So it's just a funny story of that was very emotional and but also really important to learn the poisonous plants. And so when we teach
vicariously through another.
But when we teach foraging, one of the things that a lot of foraging teachers don't do is say, actually, it's more important to learn the plants that will kill you than the ones that you can eat. And so building that conversation of deep respect of these plants that will, just take you out. They're powerful. They're powerful beings. There's only about 5 to 10 of them that will do that. But also things like foxglove, if you take a very small amount, it can be very good for your heart. So there's also this kind of demystifying these plants and taking away the fear, because actually it can be about dosage.
I guess I'm interested about your journey from there to coming here and what that transition was like, I guess, coming out of, because you said a statement to me, which is there you had like, you were wealthy in a different sense, but now you have more money, but what's that mismatch? Could you talk a bit about that?
Sure.
Because now you have a job, right?
Yeah,
and it's a very different way of living.
Yeah. So I went from self-sufficiency at both Tinker's Bubble and then a piece of land that we were gifted, to starting to meditate and having a spiritual realization that I needed to move out of my marriage. And I also meditated and I saw a bit of land, and it wasn't my land at the time. And within about a year I was invited. It was 9 months or so. I was invited to be here. So Seth, one of the founding members here, this project was started by a brother and sister called Seth and Nara. Seth had eaten at my festival cafe and bought some wild berry juice that I'd made. And so when I came for my interview and brought a box of things that I made, he knew them and essentially said to me, no, do what you know how to do, but here and bigger. And it's been a both painful and incredibly beautiful experience. One of the aspects of what I have started to talk about, but isn't that easy for me to talk about, is the fact that when I took the job, I became so poor that I was going to the food bank for some time, and subsequently as well gained quite a lot of weight, because I was used to eating loads of really healthy food. So I was used to working physically really hard and eating loads of like vegetables and duck eggs and honey from my bees and meat from my cow and cheese, because I used to milk cows. So I was used to eating all this incredibly healthy food that all of it was handmade. And then suddenly it was like, oh my gosh, I'm a single parent and I've got no time and I'm struggling to afford rent. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. I was crying every single night for about a year. And I was just following my spiritual calling. I was just trusting at that time.
What did that feel like? Can you talk a bit about that? What was that spiritual calling?
I felt like I knew the land. And I also felt like I knew Seth on a soul level. I was like, you are like a brother to me, even though you're not my biological brother. And that's just how it felt. I can't really, it was just a very deep core feeling. And the stuff that was layered on top of that were the kind of like managers, the politics of this place. And I really struggled with all of that. Like, I was like, what am I doing here? Like, I spent at least the first 2 years really questioning what I was doing here. I'd also been on quite a big journey around having my daughter with me and courts and things. And so as part of that, I'd said that this was a permanent job. So there was a million things pointing to just stay. And this real feeling that I'm meant to be sat at a crossroads. So on a soul level, when I'm just on land and isolated from modern society, I feel like, wow, we're doing beautiful things, but I'm not teaching anyone, I'm not sharing it, I'm not part of the conversation. And actually, my soul really wants to sit at the crossroads and say, over there is really beautiful, and we can do that again. Like, we can do that as a society. We can live in harmony with nature. We can go on the journey of how we relate to one another and become more interconnected again. But what does that look like? And I feel like that's really what now is about for me. It's not about purism. It's about, what does it look like to live in a way that is connected, spiritually alive to what's happening around us? And what does that mean? And that's really the question that I'm kind of exploring in 1,000 different ways, whether that's now as part of the leadership core, or, making medicinal mushroom chai syrup, or going and picking mushrooms at a neighbouring farm that I helped set up a few years ago. There's a million ways that I express that. And that's really where we're at now. And it's been weird living in a house again. It's been very weird because I'm sensitive to the noise of machines. And it feels less real to me. Modern society feels unreal. And, a neighbour of mine sadly passed away in his sleep and no one knew for days. And that's not the world that I want to grow old and die in, And so yes, I have a job. But my job, is, okay, it's head of land and food. But the other piece of what I hold here is being on the vision core that Seth and Lara invited me to be part of. And the vision is harmony with nature, self and other. And so really what, some aspects of what we're feeling into are outside of the realm of the capitalist system. And so really what it feels like we're feeling our way towards is, how do we do this dance with capitalism whilst creating more and more opportunities for people to explore the meaning of our vision on site and off site? And that may in time mean, more people living on the site in the form of an eco community, providing opportunities for people to come and farm the site. We invite people to come and be part of the retreats, but more kind of like pop-up things where people can come on and, eat a beautiful fire meal and go for a swim in the lake or go for a walk. And we're also, looking more and more about how we can do outreach work. But how we do that is really the question, that we're trying to answer in a way. Is like, what are the manifestations of the vision? And that includes, we've got a food trailer and we're foraging loads of food and making all this food as medicine, and we're hoping to feed 1,000 people at the event. And it gets expressed in millions of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, for me personally, it's the action of the moment. So it's, how am I speaking to someone? Am I showing them deep respect? Am I showing them the deepest love that I can show them? Am I listening? And one of the things that really has been coming up really strongly for me is, as we become more and more aligned as an organisation, then actually the deeper the collective wisdom grows, the more we can rest on the community of people holding the site to help guide us as well, because the more we're collectively listening, the more wisdom comes through. But it's a real art, I'm talking about a paradigm that isn't created yet, really.
It's hard to see a structure or system. It's one conversation I've been battling with. How can I see something when I'm inside something very different? You're trying looking from the inside out at a system that I can't even tangibly comprehend, but it feeds into what you're saying. It's almost like you've got to. You said it's all an experiment, really, and you know what doesn't serve you, and the rest is almost like we pray and we play and everything else you make up, right?
Yeah.
But I love that. I love that you are talking about those moments, because it's all a combination of little moments, and the interactions that we have with the people that come here, they are as so important as like the words on the website. It's in those little connections, because it's all made up of little moments within it, and I think they are, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything, because that thing instills in everything. So that is vital, I believe, to really take care of those little, the way you speak to the buckthorn, or the way you hold someone when they come here, or how it all kind of feeds into the narrative of the place.
And for me as well, increasingly, it's feeding into how I hold a meeting, and what does leadership mean, and how do we create a culture that all of us have agency? And it's, I'm sat with these questions daily. We held so I'm, as part of my role, I help to hold the kitchen, and we had a meeting today where, I hope people don't mind me sharing this, but where several people were in tears, and at one point, one of the people said, "I'm so sorry, I'm crying." I'm like, "Crime. Like, thank you for being honest. Thank you for sharing your soul and like bearing who you are and your pain. Like, that is welcome. That is welcome. Like, what would worry me?"
Yeah, not just welcome, but it's necessary.
It's necessary.
It's very important.
And it's, how do we evolve past this kind of stiff upper lip?
Yeah.
It's, a sign of strength is to be unemotional.
Yeah.
That's not really what is authentic, is what is strength. And emotion is welcome when it's held with awareness that the emotion is yours, and that it's contained within, it's my emotion.
Yeah.
You're not making me feel that way. I am feeling that way, possibly, which is arising to circumstances.
Yeah.
But how do we, hold that space? And I'm exploring that with our teams, and it's not easy, and I don't always get it right. And because of what is right, but it's not something that I've noticed that with some of the women that I've known in leadership, it's very common to want to mimic very masculine behaviours, because as a society we see many, many more men in power or in leadership historically and in the present day.
It's an energy what we view as succeeding.
Exactly.
We imitate our environment, don't we? We see someone in a position that is respectful, gets respect, and then we imitate that as like it's the right thing to do. But it's a hyper masculine world.
And I have done that myself. So sometimes when I'm in a leadership position and there's high pressure, I'm like, right, do this, like, and I'm joking, and I'm not really cultivating presence, and I have to continuously bring myself back to softening that and being alive to the moment and my own body. And it's a practice, it's not pot noodle, it's not instant.
Pot noodles. Let's talk about that. Now I want to talk about food. I want to talk about mushrooms because hot topic, of course, but something very close to your work here.
Yes.
And something really powerful that's happening on the land, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, let's invite that into the conversation just briefly. And what's happening here with mushrooms and inoculation, and what we can do as the listeners of this. What can we take forward? Should I be eating mushrooms from a supermarket that have been grown in likely plastic or synthetic environments? Like, how much nutrition is really in that? When I buy a big wonky set of mushrooms from Aldi, it's like there's a big difference between those and some that you've just inoculated into a log and bashed.
So what I would say is eat mushrooms even if they're from Aldi.
Okay.
If that's all you can afford, they're still better than buying a ready meal or a pot noodle. What I would say is if you do eat the mushrooms from Aldi, to pop them on the windowsill so that they can absorb vitamin D.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, because...
In the sun, right?
Yeah, in the sun. Because when mushrooms are grown in an indoor environment, they get no natural exposure to the sunlight, which means that when you eat them, they rob your body of vitamin D, because mushrooms are kind of still alive, actually, even when you eat them.
Wow.
They're still kind of reacting. So just in general, like, eat mushrooms. Mushrooms have so many incredible benefits, whether it's shiitake, which is amazing for regulating blood sugar, so they're really great for people with diabetes. They're also really good for people that have got burnout or fatigue or low energy. But we are growing mushrooms on logs and in beds here, so we have an outdoor, I was going to say micro mushroom farm. It's getting less and less micro with the more people that come here to help me grow mushrooms. So thank you, all the people that come and help grow
and
mushrooms.
while it's working.
Yeah, so we do working retreats here. We're kind of just rounding up for the season now, but every year from about May to July time, we hold regular working retreats where we teach outdoor mushroom growing in logs. And we're using a very ancient method. It was first documented 2,000 years ago in Asia. And it's very simple and yet very beautiful, because it does require this level of patience that we were sort of touching on. And you use a specific mushroom drill bit that we get from Japan and a specific inoculation tool. And you take a bag of mycelium, which we source ours from Gourmet Mushroom. I also work with a mycologist, because the unique piece of work that we do is we cultivate our native strains and grow them outdoors. So some people do cultivate native strains, but I haven't met anyone specifically targeting that at an outdoor growing setup. So that essentially what we're doing is almost creating like a living seed bank of mushrooms, or mycelium seed bank, so that we're really protecting what is native to our land, as well as cultivating shiitake. And a few people have said to me, why do you do that? And I did it because shiitake is a very well-known mushroom, but it's also the documentation for how to grow shiitake on logs is there. The information is there. Whereas if you look into beefsteak fungi, yields, timings, spacings, how you treat the log, what the gestation period is, there's nothing really known about it. So we're growing native beefsteak fungi, we're growing native white reishi, we're growing native turkey tail, and the one that I'm really proud of is our birch polypore mushroom. So that was found in an ancient sliver of selwood forest that we have on the land.
An ancient
sliver, so like a little piece of ancient selwood forest.
Yeah.
And we cultivated that mushroom that was found in that forest in a lab. It takes about 6 months, and then we came back, brought it on site, and injected it 2 years ago into our own logs. So all of the logs that we're producing mushrooms on are harvested from our land, and the coppicing technique that we use can mean that the tree lives up to 3 times longer. So it's again challenging this narrative for me around not interacting with nature as a way to preserve nature. And actually, in my experience, it's all about right relations. So as long as you're aware that of how to cut the tree, which our amazing forester here, Martin, does for me, then actually it can help the tree live longer. So it's a very interesting process in terms of that. But also then, once the log has fruited, which it will fruit for between 3 and 7 years, depending on the density of the wood, it becomes compost again. So it just goes back to the earth. So the legacy of the farming methodology is indistinguishable from the legacy of nature. And that's really, you know, that piece of work as well around what are we leaving behind, you know.
Yeah, so birch polypore, and you're, from what you know of, could be the first and only people in the world to farm it in this way.
Outdoors, exactly.
Outdoors.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've got about 100 fruiting logs at the moment. So we estimate that we'll have several hundred birch polypores this year, and we've just inoculated, with the help of Primal Gathering, just inoculated another 200-300 logs. So, what we do, because I'm very interested in food as medicine, so rather than preventative medicine, which is very well covered by the herbalist groups and the medical establishment, I'm interested in how do we take small amounts of medicinal foods all of the time as part of our daily practice of eating, and how do we stretch our palates to really learn and appreciate what is medicinal for us, and then our bodies start to crave those medicines. And so what we do at 42 is we decoct the birch polypore overnight and then concentrate it down really, so it's really intense, and then whip it into honey.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that's what we sell in little jars, and then you can take like half a teaspoon and put it in hot water when you're feeling run down. And the mushroom is antiviral, antibacterial, antimicrobial, antifungal, antiparasitic. So it's got a huge range of medicinal properties. I used it to treat my long COVID, which, you know, after a few months of treatment really did help.
Yeah, and this was found in the pocket, I think, of a hiker or a traveller who was 5,300 years ago.
Yes.
What was his name?
Ötzi.
Yeah. This guy was found. You haven't heard this story. It's incredible. But they found that and hook mushroom, I think. I think it was called.
It was tinder fungi.
Was it tinder fungi? What it was called? It's the Armadoo. It's like that the one that grows quite underneath. You can see like the spores.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but there was 2 kinds of mushrooms found on this guy who was frozen in ice, and it's remarkable to know that we would have had that relationship to know that this is a very powerful and potent mushroom. The other, which was the birch polypore. But the other one, apparently it was like used for resin, or like you'd light it and you could carry fires with it.
Yeah, so I call it tinder fungi.
Tinder, yeah.
But I think it's got cramp ball name as well. It's like a black fungi, and it was also used by Romanis for transporting fire in pouches. What I loved about his story is that he'd actually carved the birch polypore into beads. So not only was he using them medicinally to treat a parasite, but he also was using them ornamentally for decoration for his body.
Praying for them.
So it was amazing. And I think for me, as someone who's kind of cultivated this knowledge with their life, I think it's always interesting when people refer to what I'm into as the simple life, because the amount of complex knowledge that people had, you know, thousands of years ago sort of blows your mind. You know, they couldn't go on Google and just look up, you know, what remedy do I have for common cold.
I imagine it was quite the opposite, and these people who, you know, lived the simple life, what we would consider would be, you know, celebrated, and you know, they were the kind of people of the land that were actually full of knowledge and living a complex life because they had so much knowledge and dedicated
amounts of time, and all the gathering and the kind of planning ahead. Yeah, it's an amazing story, that one. I love it too.
It is. It's just an insight into like just rewriting our own conditioning of what we think was even possible back then, or how humans have, I guess, what's transitioned over time, where we've not placed as much value on things, and now it seems seemingly coming back into our psyches. It's like, okay, maybe we thought we knew, and we're just questioning a lot more, like what we did know, what
And
we've bought into, perhaps.
I feel like also what comes up is we want more as a race. Well, there's and now it's not more materially,
Mm-hmm.
and we some of our really big institutions are under so much pressure that they're kind of wobbling and crumbling, whether it's the teachers striking or whether it's the NHS doctors striking, and what I'm finding is someone who holds herbal knowledge and medicinal knowledge. I feel like more and more people are going, well, what can I do myself? How can I empower myself? And it's really nice to be someone who's been cultivating this knowledge as this tipping point arrives, and to be able to share things and then build on my knowledge collectively with other knowledge holders, because we all have very different lenses. And there's things that I've gotten really interested in, but there's 1,000 other, like more than 1,000 other medicines out there, whether it's because I do some beekeeping, but I wouldn't say I'm a bee whisperer as such. There's people that
There's
can there's people that can
Yeah.
really connect with that
Yeah,
world.
have a really intimate relationship with that world. Yeah.
And I do connect, and actually I've collected swarms, and we actually collected a swarm from the chimney when one of our buildings was being rebuilt, and we'll harvest honey for the first time. So we provide a home for wild honeybees, and only harvest honey in the spring when they've had the honey for the winter, But there's so many different ways so many different types of knowledge to cultivate.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it's very exciting times.
It's exciting, and you have that exciting energy about you, and I think that's what draws me to you and other people I know, because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of reasons to be feeling not inspired. There's a lot of those reasons if you look for them, but with times of crisis, there's a lot of opportunity. A lot of opportunity to double down on the things that we know is calling us to action, perhaps. Good way to end it. Thank you for spreading your wisdom, speaking your truth. What do you see in terms of the future? What holds maybe for this type of living, or like what does the future hold, do you think? Or is there anything you want to speak to that is a question or a calling to action, perhaps, for people if they're not feeling satisfied or content with the way in which they're living at the moment? What are simple things that people can?
I think like doing things is really healing. So when we feel disempowered, doing really simple things like collecting nettles and drying them on your windowsill to make nettle tea can be so much more powerful than we realise. And this summer I've done loads of physical work, and I have to say that I've noticed what I feel like was my energy levels rising. I notice that when I'm sad, I feel energyless, which makes it harder for me to do things. And actually, sometimes you have to kind of like go to a higher place with it and go, okay, this is emotional drainage, and just kind of getting out into nature, going for a walk, spending some time on your own and allowing the silence. We can get very uncomfortable with silence as modern people because we're blasted with media. Switching off the phone, right? It's a challenge, and it's been a challenge for me. I'm not immune to that. But allowing that time and space to listen to yourself and what's going on around you, and just trusting sometimes that not perhaps going with that that kind of tired, I was going to say cathartic is not the right word, lethargic, that was the word, lethargic feeling. Don't necessarily listen to it. And if you just take your shoes and socks off in a woodland and just walk for 10-15 minutes and then see how you feel, just allow that connection to happen and see what it does to your heart and go from there.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that is for me getting out of my own way. That's what that would encapsulate. Moving out of what I think I am, making space for what I'm a part of, and letting that to communicate.
Yeah.
In a way.
one of the things that I've learned here as well, and I think it's good to say, having been part of the activists, because I was very much involved with the Land Workers Alliance and the activist movement around Tinker's Bubble and anarchy and all of these concepts. And for a long time, I was really like, yeah, change. Rich people are bad, and we need to have massive land reform. And actually, I still hold that very close to my heart. I still feel like there's a lot that can be done that isn't being done. And what I would also say is, we need to hold these conversations, because actually all of us are in the situation of feeling like victims of climate change or feeling like victims of separation. And it's only through conversation and connection that we can find our way. And that is with all types of people, wealthy, poor, from all walks of life, all different countries. I think I've really learnt that we're all faced with the same challenge of what's happening to our planet. That's not discriminating. It's not, rich people may be able to fly to the moon, but what is there on the moon for them? We all have the task of this healing journey, and so showing up to the conversation from a loving place of coming back into connection with one another, I think is a more kind of wholesome, joyful place to start from. And if we start from that place, then I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I think we have to let things die, don't we? Old stories or narratives. Or Zach Bush talks a lot about what are we making space for, and why do we pretend that this period of time isn't going to produce something incredibly wonderful when it does die. And who are we to say that what that is or isn't? It's an amazing framework to step into a bit more of a openness and just falling into what's possible, perhaps, rather than trying to hold on to what was.
Or trying to make something right that was wrong. Starting from the place of potential and possibility and openness and seeing what comes.
Beautiful. How can people find you? Do you show up online or anything? Do they come here? Do they just
so I'm teaching medicine making, winter medicine making this winter. We're also exploring the possibility of doing a 42 acres inner landscape weekend. But I am on Instagram. I'm under Land Food Medicine. I don't post that much, but I do post sometimes. And I'm around. I'm here at 42 acres, and we're also hosting. We do energy exchanges and working retreats. So, depending on whether you want to come stay, there's rooms here that we hold retreats on. I've just been on retreat with Satish Kumar, which was amazing. And then there's coming on energy exchanges if you're more strapped for cash or want to learn skills and take them away.
Beautiful. Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.